Hey guys, I just wanted to kind of do a short video, well, maybe not that short, video on kind of DLC in general, but more specifically a realization I made while I was reviewing Star Ocean, the second story. And quickly, the realization I made was that in the last, I'd say 5 to 10 years, there's been sort of an erosion of that relationship between creator and consumer. Now, not to say that it was ever an incredibly close relationship, but it was certainly tighter, and there was more trust from the gamer, your average consumer, your gamer, and the people behind the games. So for instance, from a modern perspective, obviously in the moment they probably weren't thinking this, but from a modern lens, when I'm playing games like Star Ocean, and I'm noticing a lot of technical flaws, but I'm still seeing that passion and that love and the desire to simply push the medium forward and to experiment and to have, to tell a great story, to implement new systems and mechanics, even if there are a lot of flaws. I don't sense that there was ever an undercurrent of deception or taking advantage of the gaming community at all in that sense. So while I might be critical at times of some decisions that were made, I know that it was always from a place of just great care and love for what these individuals are doing. Not to say that the creative side now, and I'll get to this in just a moment, not to say that the creative side of gaming is less ambitious or less passionate. I think that would be a complete fallacy. This is just what I'm talking about in terms of the perception and the unfortunate one that a lot of gamers now have of the creative side of it, because I think they've erroneously started to kind of conflate publisher and developer. And that's one of the very, to me, unfortunate side effects of the proliferation of not only DLC, but also of microtransactions. To me, it is just really eroding what should be a strong relationship. But, back to what I was saying, it's a whole nother argument whenever I'm seeing a game that is technically, tight and well executed like a lot of modern titles, but that is accompanied by shady practices where you're always suspicious of day one DLC, something being ripped out of the title, especially in a competitive title where a little microtransaction will give you a boost and a competitive edge. I mean, it's really changing. I feel like it's changing in the landscape. And I think most gamers do understand, or at least intuitively they get what this industry has become. I mean, if we really sit down and think about it, I think the average in 2000 was 1 to 4 million it would cost to make a video game. It's now on average, or the low end, I think is 20. In 2015, I think it was 20 to 25 million. For the low end, that would be more for an independent game, but the low end being something like 20 million, but the average being closer to 60 to 70, and then of course Destiny breaking the record for most spent on a title at 500 million. So you're talking about an increase in overhead of 400% to 50,000%. So I think most gamers get that there had to be something with, the price of video games not increasing. And I think all of us are happy that they aren't increasing. But that does create a problem wherein publishers do have to make, I'm sorry I do have to play devil's advocate because I do want to be fair here. Publishers do have to find ways to, make it lucrative to keep the industry moving forward. Think about how much more specialized the industry has become. Think about how many more individuals from how many different fields are now working on a single title. And think about how triple, quadruple some of these teams are in size. You're paying a lot of money out to these individuals, so that's fine. And that's fair. But one of my biggest concerns as somebody that does review retro games and games that I love and games that meant a lot to me, meant a lot to me and still do mean a lot to me, but that is also plays a lot of modern games, is that you can only take so much of what you perceive to be, how are they going to try and get one over on me now? Or how is, a title that I really have a lot of loyalty to going to attempt to screw me over in this regard? We all know, I think most people are aware of NBA 2K's recent problems and Battlefront 2's recent issues. And that to me is almost, I hate to use where it's like unforgivable, but it gets to be really frustrating. I'm really glad I didn't purchase the NBA 2K game where you're at such a disadvantage for those that are spending money. I'm okay, maybe people will get mad at me for saying this, but I'm okay with aesthetic alterations. I've never had many qualms with those. I mean, I play League of Legends, I buy skins, I support it, it's a free title. And I get the counter to that would be, well, you're playing an NBA title where you've already spent $60, I should get plenty of aesthetics. I understand that. And saying don't purchase them if you don't want them doesn't alter the fact that they're still, kind of crummy. They feel crummy. It still feels like a crummy practice. But I can handle aesthetics. I really can. I just can't handle when there is a distinct competitive edge being created, or somebody that's dropping money in it is getting that very clear-cut edge, power edge over you, or at least it's facilitating that. Or when those aesthetics or cosmetics that you're purchasing are locked behind loot boxes, which to me feels much closer to actual gambling on a slot machine and ends up raising a lot of potential ethical dilemmas, the addictive nature of gambling, kids. I don't feel comfortable for paying X amount for a chance for a very, very low percentage shot at getting, the skin, or resources to build the skin, or duplicates of those resources to trade in for one of the other resources you need for the skin. It just starts to feel pretty frustrating and pretty predatory. I don't often use that word, but that is how that feels. So yeah, I like paying X amount of dollars, $5, $2, whatever, to get the literal skin I'm looking at right then, right there. I suppose I'm okay with that. Alan Wilson, who is, I think, the co-owner of Tripwire Gaming, I want to say. It's Tripwire Interactive, actually. He's the co-owner for Tripwire Interactive. And he wrote a piece on Gamasutra in, 2010 for Killing Floor. They did Killing Floor, they've done Red Orchestra, and they have several other titles that they've been working on. I think Killing Floor 2 actually just came out last year? No, 2016. So he had an article where he laid out a few rules for the way in which he was going to do it. He talked about the unfortunate truths of it and how it was needed to keep them afloat, but that his two primary rules were that it didn't create a competitive disadvantage, okay, quote unquote, or that it was something that you had to have, and that it would always come with a bunch of free stuff as well. And I think that's pretty admirable, and I think that a lot of gamers would be totally down with that, because I don't see in many individuals having problem with well-done DLC that isn't ripped from the game, that expands the lore, that expands the universe, that adds creatures, that adds mechanics to combat. I mean, Fallout is one of my go-to examples. The Witcher 3 is another brilliant one. I loved the Fallout's DLC. I love the way that was done. It's just a lot of, I guess it's more microtransactions, honestly, that I have a larger problem with than a lot of the strictly DLC stuff. I just can't stand the practices of giving a competitive advantage, or the likelihood of a competitive advantage, because you're being able to access these things faster for a cheaper price. Now, all of that, whatever. I think most gamers understand this. I don't want to harp on this for too long, because there are tons of videos that have done this and have put more research into it and more time than I have, and I've read about it quite a bit, but even then. What my bigger concern is that there are a lot of ridiculously talented individuals working in the gaming industry right now, and I don't sense the same type of loyalty or awe or appreciation that was once had for these figures in the mid to late 90s and even early 2000s. And I feel that this is one of the reasons that this is the case, is that if a game like, say, for instance, Battlefront 2 comes out and you're immediately turned off by all of these shitty practices, and you're throwing the game under the bus, you're not realizing the effort that a lot of the actual people creating the content. It's one of the most beautiful games I've ever seen. The audio design was brilliant too. The recreation of the Star Wars feel and world was astounding. It's frustrating that seems to get swept under the rug, and the frustrations with what are admittedly some just, to me, foul practices. And that's what I mean when I say that erosion, that it feels like an erosion of that relationship. We knew, hey, if a game on the PS1, Super Nintendo, even the PS2 era disappoints us, it's usually going to be the way of creative decisions that, while frustrating, you can live with, because you see that this was a vision, this was an artistic direction an individual was taking the game, and that's okay. It's probably all the more frustrating to see a game that takes steps that you agree with, artistically and creatively and mechanically, but yet subscribes to practices that will place you at a disadvantage against someone willing to spend $100 on experience boost. It's frustrating, I made the comparison the other day that you can handle a guy dunking on you in a video game with a pink mohawk and pink Converses probably a lot easier if he's the same rating than you could on the second day if he's a 90 and you're a 75 and he's wearing the generic. And he just has the generic look, but it's so much better than what you could ever hope to achieve. That's ridiculous. That feels hopeless. I don't really want to offer any pleas to, boycott or, speak with your money, because it's hard. I've violated that axiom a lot, that sort of gaming axiom of vote with your wallet, don't give them your money. I've violated that plenty of times. It's easy to say, but you see the game, you want to play it, you've got your buddies playing it. It's easy to violate. Instead, I would say that, seek transparency. It's hard to say, hey, a game that you've had loyalty or brand loyalty to, or you've played with your friends since you were, for 10 years now, it's hard to just say, hey, just don't purchase it, period. That's difficult to follow through with. I'd say it's more likely that we should be looking for transparency. I think that's how you gain a stronger, not necessarily gain, but maybe rekindle. That's how you kind of regain some of that lost trust with the gaming community. Not that any execs would be looking at my channel, but I think that's what you go for, is you go for transparency. Obviously, some of the way that they make their money is by not being terribly transparent with what's going on, and tricking is maybe too strong of a word, because, again, I think most of us are smart enough to see the game going on behind the scenes with these purchases and avoid them altogether if we don't want them, or, if you do purchase them. I'm not saying you're an idiot if you get quote-unquote tricked into this. That's certainly not the case. But I just desire a level of just being straightforward, like Alan Wilson was in his post. Hey, we have to make some more money or we can't continue going. Sure, that feels a little flat coming from EA, but there are other publishers doing this as well. And there are other, creative individuals in the industry that have talked about this and have talked about how they've had to work on downloadable content while the game is not even yet complete, and how the upside of that is that it does give more people jobs, but that it is a really shady practice, or that it feels really shitty even to them. So I think it's important to realize that enemy is a ridiculous word here, right? But I don't think they deserve that much of our ire, of our frustration. I think it's more so just communicating that it's transparency that needs to occur. Because when I look at, right now I'm playing Xenosaga, episode 1, and boy, is it a blast, and boy, does it have a lot of cutscenes. But the flaws that I see, again, it's just, I would much rather see a project of love that is too ambitious and flawed in ways that I know are from a very passionate. And not that this is a terribly flawed title. So far, I am just loving it. But again, that would be that's what I prefer to see out of the two frustrating aspects of this industry. Would you rather see flaws created from passion and love and, ambition and desire, or would you see flaws from, needing to see monetary gain to keep it afloat? Seems like a necessary evil at this point, but it's just something that really hit me when I was reviewing Star Ocean and listening to interviews from, or reading interviews rather, from individuals that were working with Trice at the time and about what they put into this game, where their influences came from. And that's the same with Takahashi for Xenosaga. And when you read about what his aims were, and it feels like there's a definite passion there, and that passion is still there. That's the point I want to make too. So I don't think getting too frustrated with the entire industry or all of the individuals behind these video games is the right play here, but I do see why it becomes conflated, why that aspect of it becomes confused. This has been really rambly, so I hope it wasn't too difficult to follow. It's just something that really I felt compelled to talk about because I don't really know what the next step or where we're headed. But I do feel it, and boy, it sounds hokey to say I feel something there, but I do. I see a large degree of dissatisfaction with the gaming community with those practices. Meanwhile, in the midst of all this, there are still so many just brilliant games being created that every time I start to feel really dissatisfied with something, like really looking forward to Battlefront 2 and getting really dissuaded by some of those early practices, even if they attempted to pacify some of that frustration. Same with 2K, because I do love basketball. Every time I start to feel that it's just, oh boy, this is, there's going to be a major sort of boycott, then, there's several video games released that are just done the right way, that are mind-bogglingly and wonderfully created, and they are from bigger studios, not just from indie developers, So, again, hope it wasn't too rambly. Appreciate you guys hanging in there. But let me know how you feel about DLC, where you feel it's going. Do you get what I'm talking about, or does this seem absurd? Like I said, some of the biggest concerns I have looking at older video games are such minor gripes, and at the end of the day, I see that love and passion. Just to summarize, and a lot of modern games are so polished, so and sometimes maybe too polished, which seems ridiculous, but sometimes there's just not enough venturing out of that sort of formulaic standard that have been created for a lot of games nowadays. But that's okay too. There's just some great stuff out there, but I'm always worried, and my guard is always up for weird microtransaction practices or DLC that doesn't feel like it's even worth $5, let alone 15, or season passes that opens up again a really strange commitment, and a trust that has been violated many times over. So yeah, just let me know your thoughts. As always, I appreciate you guys stopping by. Xenosaga is on its way. I'm about 15-20 hours into the game. Hopefully I'll be done within the next week, and maybe it'll be out in a few weeks. Thanks, guys.